My name is Katelyn, and this is my husband, Brandon. And I am here because I'm doing a research project for my MSc program on sled dogs and their emotions.
I'm here to cuddle puppies.
And he's helping me film. So my project is exploring the use of something called qualitative behavioral assessment. And what it does is it looks at the way an animal moves or behaves versus just how it's moving, or behaving, like barking, running. So it's more the way an animal is moving. So in an agitated manner, in a relaxed manner. And so what I'm doing is looking to see if it's something that can be used with sled dogs. And specifically, I'm starting with different housing environments. So looking at dogs that live on tethers or chained, dogs that are in cages, and then dogs that live indoors. And just seeing if there's any potential that, or looking to see which one might have positive behaviors versus neutral or more negative behaviors. But mostly just exploring if qualitative behavioral assessment is something that can be used for sled dogs.
And has it been used on other animals?
Yes, it has been validated for, horses, cows, or cattle, sheep, I believe, goats, dogs, and they're actually starting to use it with fish, and there's another one. Yeah, I just was reading one this morning about farmed fish. They're starting to use it and see if it's, if it's applicable to farmed fish. So it has been used for lots of different animals, including dogs and other situations, like in shelters and things like that.
So it should be applicable to sled dogs.
Yeah.
And then why are you specifically interested in sled dogs?
So we used to live in Alaska, and while we were there,
Whereabouts?
in Anchorage, Alaska, and while we were there, we adopted our own Alaskan Husky. She was from Bush, Alaska, and we also got the chance to watch the Iditarod, I think once. At least
We only
once.
went to the start line once.
Yeah, but it used to pass by our house every year. And so I've loved dogs since I was little, and I have a particular interest in working dogs. So that includes sled dogs, search and rescue dogs, military working dogs, police dogs. Dogs. Just dogs. So yeah, I fell in love with Alaskan Huskies and have been interested in sled dogs since we lived in Alaska.
And you also like dogs? You're just along for the ride.
Both. I love dogs, but yeah, here to support.
And why did you choose to do the study here?
So I wanted to make sure to find somewhere that I knew had really high standards of care for their animals, just because that's important to me personally. And as part of our research proposal, we have to go through all sorts of approvals for veterinary ethics approvals, human ethics approvals. And so they ask us, if you're going to have people watching videos of sled dogs or any animal really, what do you do if it makes people uncomfortable to watch, whether it was pigs, dogs, horses, if it causes them any distress, I think is the word. So how do we handle that? And so one of the ways that we have to do that is to make sure that we use footage that represents people who care for their animals properly, animals that have good welfare, because we are obligated as part of our MSc program and as future animal welfare scientists, we're obligated to report any mistreatment, neglect, abuse. And so it was important to me that I find somewhere that I knew had really high standards for welfare. Hi.
So is this something that's funded by the university, or did you have to fund it yourself? How does the research work with that?
So because it's an MSc program, it's out of pocket, and it's something that I just chose to do because of something interesting to me and something that I actually cared about. So if it was a PhD program, it would be funded, but I'm just a little MSc student. So it was out of my own pocket, and it was something that I was really driven and motivated and interested in doing, and so I decided to just pay for it out of pocket.
And are you interested in doing a PhD and following this on, or?
Potentially, yes. I think there's a lot that we have to do, not just for sled dogs, but all working dogs. and improving their welfare no matter what type of job they have or where they are. And so I think there's a lot of potential with sled dogs. And I would like to further my studies and research in looking at, and looking at how we can make sure that dogs are happy in their jobs.
What do you think we could do to make them happier here?
These dogs seem actually pretty, from just observing, not quantifying or anything, but these dogs seem very well socialized. They love people.
With a few exceptions.
We haven't met them yet.
Teddy.
Yeah.
Well,
Teddy was good with me, but it took a little while. But these dogs seem really, that's just from personal opinion. The dogs here seem really well adjusted, very happy, a balanced lifestyle. And they clearly, which is what I've known this most, not always, just like with people, they seem to really love their job. And it's really fun to see that.
Okay.
to see the excitement they have to get out and be put on the line and to run. It's fun to see.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about qualitative behavioural analysis and who developed it.
So qualitative behavioral assessment was developed by Professor Francois, I'm really sorry, Professor, I'm going to say your last name wrong, Wemmelsfelder. And she is at the Scottish Rural College, and they partner often with University of Edinburgh to do a lot of research on animal welfare. So she created this, and she actually used the example of, I guess, in the food industry, they use this particular method of being able to quantify something that is qualitative. So the quality of something, how good it tastes. And so she thought, well, why can't we do that with animals? So she developed this method, and it's basically a way of looking at previously in science, we thought that emotions are innate. We can't see them, only the individual can experience them and know them. And we're learning that just as with humans, animals can outwardly express the way that they're feeling as well.
Like flowers.
Mm-hmm. And so instead of relying just on physiological markers like stress hormones, heart rate, because those things can indicate both good and bad things. So an animal can be really excited about going to work, or it could be they're aroused by...
Or stressed at the thought.
Or stressed, could be anything. And so this is a way of basically using what people already do. We already interpret our animals' behavior. We anthropomorphize a lot of it, which is good and bad. So it just kind of built on that and is a way for people who really know their animals to be able to interpret how the animal is feeling, to help us get a better idea of where we can do better for them, where we're doing really well, or to notice like, oh, something's off with that particular pig, and figure out what's going on. And so she's worked for the past 25 years on this method, and has worked really hard to make sure that it's very validated through lots of scientific and rigorous research. And scientists are starting to accept this method more and more, and understanding that we really can identify emotions in animals outwardly versus just using those internal like blood work and urine samples. So yeah.
I guess one of the challenges you found was that some of the dogs just were asleep.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that as part of the assessment?
So, I mean, in reality, sleeping is a behavior just like with people. If you're tired, you sleep. If you're, I think when I've had hot chocolate and I'm nice and warm and cozy, I like to go to sleep. So it is a little tricky particularly with their little houses, because you can't always see in them, or they're curled up facing away from you. So some of those we may not be able to use that footage, just because we do need to be able to, to see what they're doing. But it's a behavior just like anything else, and can be interpreted. If they're comfortable enough to sleep, then that's an interpretation as well.
And then how did you actually do the study here? Like how did you do a random sample, or how did we
build it?
Yeah.
So what I did was I got a list from Anna, and I just went through a map that had everyone on circles, everyone in cages, and I just went through and made a list and numbered everyone, so that way everyone had a number. And then what I did was I used a random randomization calculator. So I inputted I need numbers between 1 and, I think there was like 89 dogs that we used for cages. And then I wanted 25 or 20 of those numbers, and then it randomized it for me. And so I matched the number with the dog and wrote it down. And then we took our cameras and tripod and set up the camera in front of the circle or in front of the cage. And we would start it. We'd get a good shot, make sure it was clear, press start, and then we actually walk out of the view of the dogs and make sure that no one's talking. You guys are a working farm, and so working was fine. We just couldn't have anyone talking or in the shot. But we made sure that we stayed out of view so that way we don't influence the dog's behavior at all, because they want to be with people so much that we had to be really careful about being out of sight. So we'd film them for 5 minutes, and then we'd come back and we'd turn it off. We'd make sure that we got in there at least a minute where the dog was visible and could be seen and there was no talking in it. And then we move on to the next dog that was in our randomized sample list. So we went through all the dogs that way. Some we had to redo because it started to get really cold, and a lot of them were sleeping more curled up in their houses. So yeah, we just went through and filmed all of them. And then the inside dogs, what we did was wherever their particular area was, same sort of thing. We'd set up the tripod and camera, make sure that we have a good view of the room and of the dog, and then we leave the room and let them do what dogs are going to do. And the best option is to make sure that I don't include in that 1 minute clip that we'll clip them down to. Don't include the first few seconds when they're still interested in where we've gone and looking towards where we've walked away. And so making sure that it's representative of just what their behavior would be without us interfering.
And then how do you take account of things like age? And I think we've randomly generated 3 or 4 dogs from one litter with the assessment. And I guess, what was the other thing I was thinking? Well, and the cold. Like some days were colder than others. Like is that just something you'll talk about in the report and then deal with it that way, basically?
Yeah. For age, I wanted to make sure that I had dogs that were at least partially working already. So Leica was a harder one because she's so young. So I wanted to make sure.
And these guys are not part of the study yet.
No. So I wanted to make sure to include dogs that were used to living on the circles, at least somewhat, used to being in the house, used to being in the cages. And generally, I think just reading from your website was just super informative and helpful, knowing that you guys gradually transitioned the younger dogs to living full-time in those settings. And so I chose 2 as kind of a minimum age bracket. A little trickier with the indoor dogs since a lot of them, like we've talked about, are older. So we'll have to, I'll discuss that in the paper as well, that this could skew it a little bit just because they're older, and older dogs in general are less active. So a lot of those things we'll discuss. I made sure to account for or to record what the temperature was that day. Because you can't control everything in this situation, especially since this particular research project for me is more exploratory rather than I'm not trying to prove anything. And so it's okay to have those different parameters that I didn't absolutely control for. But in the future, if I wanted to continue on with it, I would have to set up really standardized set ways of doing it to account for all those factors, to make sure that we're really trying to figure out what key factors or causes might be.
And I think in your random sample, we took out a few new dogs that had just come in, who probably also have a little bit of an impact on the other dogs because of being new and having high energy. Like in that right-hand new, they're so barky.
Yes, they are.
But that's also normal when they come in. What did you expect the farm to be like from the website? Is it similar to what we said, or is it different? And what did you expect from your kind of findings? Was it easier to do the project or harder? Or
I think actually the website is so informative that it wasn't a surprise what things looked like and how it was laid out.
Or how things
operate
our
too.
familiarity with kind of working farms or equine centers and things like that, I think prepped us for
The
the way the
busyness
system might be
and
built and how it operates a little bit.
so there wasn't much surprise there, and I was grateful that you guys include so much information on your website about what a day looks like for these dogs, because it helped me in planning. Well, how do I want to go about this? Like, what was the next question?
How would we go about doing something differently?
I think what's unfortunate is that this is a really not fantastic time of year to do it. I'm just bound by we as students can't do anything as field work related or anything unless it's during the school year dates, because then we're not covered by their insurance and all that. So that's something that I think I would have done differently, but it was helpful to know that this time of year it'll be
possible.
different depending on the time of year.
And it would actually be interesting to do the same research in summer, in autumn, in winter, and in spring. Like, 'cause I think they might get done with the sledding in the kind of in the middle of the season. I'm not sure. And then also how quickly they go back to whatever the normal is, if we could even define a normal. That would be interesting.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things was in the future, if I did something like this moving forward, I would want to see it different times of year, depending on how busy the farm is, how busy the dogs are. The temperature probably plays a big part. In the summer, it's much hotter, and so they might be less active. So that's something that was tough for me this time, was knowing I'm coming at a really difficult time and trying really hard to work around how busy training is, and not get in the way or interrupt anything, but also recognizing, we're on a really shortened timeline every day because you guys get going pretty quickly.
Well, in daylight.
And daylight.
Light to film.
Yeah. So that's something
I think in spring you'd have really different findings as well, because the dogs are sunbathing on top of the kennels all in spring.
Yeah.
So a lot of farms leave the kennels kind of more insulated, like they use the snow as an insulating layer, and they kind of eventually become little igloos. But we don't, so we kind of trust that they're insulated well enough, because we know that in spring they like to be on the top off the snow, but in the sunshine, like kind of basking, I suppose. But so that's quite a different behavioural time.
Yeah.
And in the summer it gets too hot.
Yeah. So I think that's the biggest thing I would do. I don't know that I do it differently, because I think it is important to even do it now, because you can find information at any time of year.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were restricted with your master's to this time of year.
Yeah.
Well, in a PhD situation,
You can do it
a lot more
throughout the
flexibility.
year, and more flexibility.
Maybe more cameras
Yeah.
to capture some behaviors for some of these dogs that were in their kennels regularly, or in their houses inside the cages. Being able to set cameras up over and over again in the event that maybe we capture behavior that's identifiable, that's visible, that might have made a bit of a difference.
And I know some of the studies that have used qualitative behavioral assessment, they have actually filmed for like an hour straight. They just leave the cameras running for an hour. So something like that would be really interesting, just to see the differences throughout the day.
A minute is such a short time frame to capture anything, really.
Yeah. And so because this is just kind of an exploratory study, we did a shorter 5 to 10 minutes. But it would be interesting in the future to set one up for an hour and see how their behavior changes throughout the day and times. And
if you had to say beforehand where you thought the dogs would be happier, cages or circles, what would you have thought, and what is your impression, without looking at any footage, so without knowing anything really, but just a sort of first impression?
I think actually, and this is not based on any data, this is just my own personal opinion, I think overall the dogs that were on circles seem to be the most content, I guess, the best word I can come up with. They content and not alert, just attentive to their environment. They were, but in a relaxed manner, which was interesting. The dogs in the kennels, cages, tended to sleep a lot more. That could be also temperature related. So I found it to be roughly, the cages felt similar to like indoor setting. Like I know our own personal dogs, I know when we leave the house for hours at a time, they just sleep. Like they just lay around and sleep because there's nothing interesting to do. And so the cages actually felt a little similar to that, kind of like, well, there's not much to see or do, so we'll just sleep. Whereas the dogs outside seemed to be more watching what was going on, not necessarily in an agitated way, just curious, watching the world.
They've got a bigger vision, viewpoint. I don't know what the word is.
Yeah. So I thought that was interesting. I came in not with any sort of expectation on one being more than the other or better. I genuinely was curious and am still curious because I think there's a lot we could do using actual standardized, really standardized parameters. It would be really interesting to continue on with it and see what the differences actually are.
So did you look at any of the previous research prior to doing this that has been done, and what is out there that you've seen?
All that I've been able to find that's
On sled dogs.
on sled dogs specifically was a study done by researchers at Cornell University. I think it was in 2001.
Quite a long time ago.
It was quite a while ago, and they just looked at activity, really. They looked at behavior, but from an activity perspective. So whether the dogs had stereotypies, like jumping up and down on the fence, circling, pacing, and other behaviors. And they didn't find any difference between the dogs on circles and the dogs in cages. Oh, I'm sorry, sweetie. That, as far as I know, is the only published study that has been done specifically on sled dogs and housing. There's been others on shelter dogs living in kennels versus in the house, things like that. But there was a presentation done. I can't remember their names because I couldn't find any paper that actually went along with it. And so it's not one that I will be using in my project because there's no paper to go along with it and no to reference, and there's very minimal data that was provided in the presentation. So as far as I know, that's the only study specifically on sled dogs and housing that's been done. They have done recently one on the activity patterns of working versus non-working sled dogs. I just started reading that before we left, and I couldn't tell you what the exact results of the study were, but
Who did that?
oh goodness,
You know who you are.
Oh, hi.
I know that
Let's
it
see
was
where her puppies are. You got your puppies? We have. They're okay. We can put them back. Hi. Mm-hmm.
okay. You want to check on this one too? Yeah. Okay. And then there's Georgie.
Yep. So how was your overall experience?
Has been really great. The guides have been fantastic at teaching us how things operate. I love the dogs, but I love dogs. So I have loved giving them cuddles and love and meeting all of them and seeing their different personalities. Yeah, it's been really great to see a working
And
operation.
novel, having been around sled dogs for several years and owning our own, who probably the worst sled dog ever if we actually put her on a sled. But it's really fun to be able to go out and train with the guides and kind of get some of that experience as well as see the inner workings of a sled dog farm.
Tough job, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. These are hard workers. It's amazing to watch. And doing it all in the cold on top of it all. Yeah.
Yeah. And these dogs aren't, like, when they are excited and ready to go, like, you've got to be a strong person because these dogs are ready to pull. And so,
They're built for it, bred for it.
yeah. So it's been really fun to see how excited the dogs are to do their job. It's been really interesting.